Here's the number that should bother you. 77%. That means if you're watching this and you actually train, you're already in a small minority. You already know something most people don't. But here's the number that should bother you more. 80%. That's not people who don't care. That's not people who lack information. Those are people who tried, genuinely tried, and still ended up back where they started. So the question isn't whether you know what to do, you do. The question is why knowing is not enough. We've been sold a story about health that is almost entirely wrong. The story goes like this. The people who eat well, train consistently, and age well, they're just more motivated, more disciplined. They want it more. If you could just find that same drive, that same internal fire, you'd get the same results. But that story is wrong. It's not supported by the research. What works is design, not motivation, not discipline, not a better morning mindset. Design, the architecture of your day, specifically the first half of it. The first half determines outcomes that no amount of willpower can replicate consistently. I want to tell you when I actually learned this, because it didn't come from research. It came from a century ride. I've been cycling seriously for years. I've done Ironman triathlons, long distance events at altitude, but there was a period, and I suspect some of you know this, where training was inconsistent. I'd do it well for a few weeks and then life would interrupt and I'd lose the thread. I was relying on motivation to show up every morning, and motivation, as it turns out, is not a really reliable alarm clock. What changed was this. I started signing up for century rides, 100-mile rides at staged destination locations, places close enough to drive to, but that were far enough that it felt like a nice weekend trip. Lake Tahoe, wine country, coastal routes. There's a lot of great places here where I live in California, and there were rides at every one of those locations that I often signed up for. And here's what I noticed. I didn't have to motivate myself to train. The registration confirmation did the motivating. The hotel booking did the motivation. I mean, I put money into this, so I knew I was going to do it, and it motivated me. All I had to do was not get in the way of it. What I had done without fully understanding it at the time was architect a system that made the behavior I wanted almost impossible to avoid. I'd engineered myself into the life I wanted to live. The research now calls this environmental design. The idea that the most reliable path to consistent behavior is not trying harder, it's reducing the friction between you and the behavior you want, and increasing the friction between you and the behavior you don't. You don't need more discipline. You need a better architecture. So, what does that architecture actually look like? Over several years of myself paying attention to what I was doing and eventually grounding this in formal nutrition science at Stanford, I landed on something I now think of as the first half principle, and I want to share that with you. The insight is this. If you design just 3 inputs before noon, you've accounted for roughly 95% of your long-term health outcomes. Not because the afternoon doesn't matter, it does, but because the first half of the day is where the architecture lives. It's where habits are most durable, where metabolic conditions are set, and where behavioral momentum that carries you through the rest of your day is either established or lost. The first input is breakfast, not optional, not interchangeable, a specific composition, quality protein, complex carbohydrates, fiber that changes how your glucose behaves for the next 4 to 6 hours. This is the metabolic foundation that everything else runs on. The second input is movement. And if you're an endurance athlete who's been skipping the gym, I'm specifically talking to you. After 50, aerobic training alone does not address it, That is part of the movement, but it's not all of it. The muscle loss that becomes one of the primary mechanisms of functional decline is real, and you need to pay attention to it. So you need both. The research is not ambiguous on this. The third input is lunch, and this is matched to what your morning demanded. A recovery meal after a hard session, a maintenance meal after a lighter one. This is the input that most people get wrong because they treat lunch as a fixed rather than something that's responsive to their morning. So 3 inputs before noon, that's the architecture. Dinner is yours, afternoon is flexible, evening is for recovery. The first half of the day is where you do not compromise. My wife, Lori, and I built a resource around this, and it's called The First Half. It's a 65-page guide with specific protocols behind everything I just described. The 2 breakfast formulations I actually use, the 3 movement protocols appropriate for where you are in your training life, 2 lunch options matched to training load, and the science that explains why each of these elements work. This isn't a diet plan. It's a decision elimination system. The architecture, written down and designed to be used. If what I've described here makes sense to you, if you recognize yourself in any of this, that's where the implementation lives. There's a link in the description to this ebook. You'll also get a subscription to the Road Less Traveled newsletter. Go to the link in the description to pick up your copy now. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Whether or not you ever look at that resource, the people who are still training at 60, 70, 80, the ones who haven't lost the thread, almost none of them will tell you it's because they're more motivated than you. What they'll tell you, if you ask them honestly and they're answering honestly, is that they built a life where not training is actually more inconvenient than training. That's the whole game. Not discipline, it's architecture. Subscribe to this channel if it's new to you. This is what every video here is about. I always want to leave you with something that I think you can take with you as an ageless athlete. I'll see you out there.